when I was younger and full of the mythology of my own immortality and invulnerability, I once took a solitary 750-mile hike from Stevens Pass in western Washington to Yellowstone in Wyoming over a very biblical-sounding 40 days. Now, I know what you're doing the math, 750 divided by 40. Well, I had a couple injuries along the way, and I used to sit in my tent all by myself, grumbling as I stared down at my swollen ankle, that sort of thing. But yeah, solitary. I was all by myself. No following car, no friends, just toughing it out by myself, looking at the neighbors in my campsite who probably thought I was a serial killer because, hey, I was camping all by myself. At any rate, it changed me, the experience, but it also made me think more about campers and hikers. And ever since then, I've always had this sort of like eye in the news for interesting news about campers and hikers around the world. And you know where I'm going. This is sort of a sad affair, this extremely tragic event that happened in Morocco. Those two sweet, adorable college-age girls, Louisa and Maren, who wound up beheaded because they chose the wrong weekend to go to Morocco. It's really sad. It's awful. And yet, in the midst of all this tragedy, there is a silver lining, and I wanted to talk about that for a bit. One of the things that came out of this awful affair was that the country itself sort of woke up to the vulnerability of its own economy because it relies so heavily on tourism. It's the second largest employer and has fully 10% of their economy. It was much like the Al-Qaeda bombing in Bali that a friend of mine actually sort of was able to bring to a healing end a month later. People in Morocco did the same thing. They just sort of rallied around this and said, this will not happen here. This will not happen here. It was supposed to be ISIS coming back, and that was the first news. That's what everybody was terrified, that ISIS was moving from Syria to Morocco and going after targeting European tourists because the Imli region, which is right smack in the middle of Morocco, where I put a heart there, is it's famed for its beauty and for its hiking trails. And there are all these really cool places like Ait Ben Haddou, you know, this Casbah. A Casbah, and it makes you think about that British punk band, you know, back in the 80s, had some song about rocking the Casbah, that kind of thing. Yes, it's a citadel, an old citadel, a Moorish one, and it's been used as a film set for like Game of Thrones and Lawrence of Arabia and probably Star Wars and things like that. It's just so much to see there, and people are just, in Morocco, are proud of it. It's not just a movie about Casablanca. I mean, it's not a country about a Casablanca, the movie. It's so much more, and it was this really wonderful place, very short hop and a skip away for European students to go down and do something interesting. And that's why they targeted them. But the interesting thing about this is it wasn't ISIS. Oh, they wanted to be ISIS. It was just a bunch of thugs. And that's the silver lining, because the authorities in Morocco, with the help of the authorities in Europe, moved very quickly and put an end to it. They scooped them up in days, just days, and weeks later they're still breaking them and arresting more. It's probably going to turn out to be like 20 guys, 20 thugs who just are too lazy to hold down a day job, and so they just wrap themselves in the flag of the Quran and say, oh, aren't we righteous because we're beheading college students from Europe? That's the silver lining. For a good 2 decades now, humanity as a unit, as a global unit, has struggled with violent Islam, wondering what to do about it. And we're finally getting a handle on it. We're finally learning to distinguish between those who profess religious themes as they preach violence. We're learning to set that aside and see them for the thugs, the criminals, the sick whack jobs that they are, and throwing them in jail. I look forward to more of that. But back to the girls. in our lifetime, we become prisoners of history, of our time. We don't get to choose our time. That choice is made for us. But also, in a way, Louis and Maren had become the history of that country they love so much. And we will always remember them for that.